The call came in just after sunrise, routed through a county office that hadn't handled a case like this in nearly 2 decades. The voice on the other end was calm, almost detached, as if the words themselves hadn't fully registered yet. A backcountry volunteer had logged an unusual find during a routine catalog sweep in a restricted wildlife zone, an item preserved by cold, rusted by time, and marked in a way that made it impossible to dismiss as coincidence. By mid-morning, the file labeled Campsite Incident, closed 2005, was pulled from storage. It hadn't been opened in 18 years. Before we go into today's heartbreaking story, make sure you support the channel, like this video, leave a comment, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another true crime story just like this. In late October of 2005, 3 girls vanished during a short overnight retreat in the Red Willow Range, a rugged stretch of protected forest tucked between state lines and rarely visited outside hunting season. The area was known for its sharp elevation drops, dense fir corridors, and weather patterns that changed without warning. Cell service didn't exist. Radio contact faded unpredictably. Even experienced hikers treated the region with caution. The girls, aged 13, 14, and 15, were part of a small outdoor skills program organized by a local community center. It wasn't a wilderness survival camp, not officially. Just a supervised weekend meant to build confidence before winter set in. There were no long treks planned, no advanced terrain. One base campsite. One night. A return by midday Sunday. They never made it back. When the supervising adults returned to the campsite early that morning, everything looked paused. The fire pit still held warmth beneath a layer of ash. 3 sleeping bags were laid out neatly inside the tent. Shoes were aligned just outside the flap, dry despite the dew. Backpacks sat upright, unzipped, as though someone expected to come back for them. The tent itself was zipped shut. From the inside. Search crews arrived within hours. Dogs were brought in by nightfall. Helicopters circled the ridgelines for 2 days straight. Hundreds of volunteers combed the forest floor in expanding grids, marking trees with tape, mapping every stream, every ravine, every animal trail. Nothing was found. No footprints leading away. No signs of struggle. No blood. No torn fabric. It was as if the girls had stepped out of existence. The case unraveled slowly, then all at once. After 10 days, the official search was scaled back. After 30, it was suspended entirely. Weather moved in. Snow closed the upper trails. The forest reclaimed itself with unnerving speed. The investigation leaned heavily on one assumption: the girls had wandered off at night. Disorientation. Exposure. A tragic mistake magnified by terrain. But there were details that never quite fit. The fire had been tended recently. The food cache was untouched. And nothing explained why 3 teenagers would leave their shelter, barefoot or lightly dressed, without a single item, not even a flashlight. Over time, the case slipped from headlines into rumor. Locals whispered about strange figures seen near the tree line. Hunters claimed they heard voices calling names that didn't belong to anyone they knew. One man insisted he'd found markings carved into a fallen log, simple shapes, erased by time before anyone official could see them. None of it was enough. By 2007, the file was archived. By 2010, it was considered functionally cold. 18 years passed. Then came the find. The Red Willow Bear Containment Corridor, a chain of elevated storage platforms designed to keep food away from wildlife, had been closed since a mudslide made part of the slope unstable. In early 2023, a conservation team began reassessing the area for controlled reopening. That's when a volunteer noticed something jammed beneath one of the platforms. At first, It looked like scrap metal. But once it was freed from the debris, its shape became clear. A folding utility blade. The handle eaten away by rust, the hinge stiff with age. And carved deep into what remained of the grip, just visible beneath corrosion, was a name. Not scratched. Not accidental. Carved deliberately. Below it, a year. The year the girls disappeared. The item was logged, photographed, bagged, and quietly forwarded to the State Forensic Unit. Within 48 hours, the old case was reopened under a new designation, suspended, active review. The investigator assigned to the file had never heard of the disappearance before. She wasn't local. She didn't grow up with the rumors. To her, it was just another cold case, until she started reading. She noticed the inconsistencies immediately. The search zone in 2005 had never included the slope where the bare corridor stood. At the time, it was ruled too unstable to access safely. No one had returned since, which meant no one had ever looked there. When permission was granted to conduct a controlled excavation beneath the platform, the team expected to find old animal dens. Maybe discarded gear. Possibly nothing at all. Instead, they uncovered a recessed structure built into the hillside. It was concealed with unnatural precision, logs cut to size, soil layered carefully over the roof, drainage channels carved to divert runoff. From above, it blended seamlessly into the terrain. From the inside, it told a different story. The chamber was small, barely tall enough to stand in. The walls were reinforced with salvaged timber and lined with faded fabric, blankets, tarps, something meant to soften sound. On one wall, barely visible beneath years of moisture damage, were drawings. Stick figures. 3 grouped together. 1 set apart. In one image, a line connected the figures' heads, looping back and forth as if something was being transferred. On the ground, pressed into the dirt, were impressions that looked like repeated kneeling. In the corner, fragments of paper, too degraded to read fully, were recovered and sealed for lab analysis. But it was what lay beneath the floor that changed everything. A secondary hatch. Concrete-lined, reinforced, and locked from the outside. As the team prepared to open it, one of the officers noticed something etched faintly into the concrete near the hinge. A phrase. Repeated. Over and over. Not a name, but a correction. And as the hatch was finally lifted, revealing the darkness below, the investigator realized the truth was far more disturbing than anyone had imagined. Because this wasn't a place where someone had gone missing. It was a place where someone had been kept. And whatever had happened to the 3 girls in 2005, it hadn't ended there. The air that escaped from the chamber was cold and stale, carrying a smell that didn't belong in an open forest, metallic, damp, and faintly chemical. Investigators paused, letting sensors cycle before anyone descended. Whatever this place had been, it was sealed with intention. The ladder bolted to the wall was custom-cut, not store-bought. Each rung showed wear, the metal polished smooth by repeated use. At the bottom, the chamber opened into a narrow room with sloped walls and a shallow trench running down the center, leading to a rusted floor drain. Along the walls were metal loops. Not randomly placed. Not decorative. Even before evidence markers were set down, everyone in the room understood the implication. This wasn't a shelter. It wasn't a hideout. It was a holding space. Forensic processing took days. Soil samples were lifted in careful layers. Fibers were bagged. Microscopic traces were scraped from the drain. On one wall, faint smudges appeared under alternate light, handprints at different heights, some overlapping, some deliberately wiped away. Near the back corner, half buried beneath compacted dirt, a small object emerged. A tooth. It was sealed immediately and rushed to the lab. By the time results came back, the case had shifted from missing persons to something else entirely. The tooth belonged to one of the 3 girls, and the growth pattern indicated it had been lost naturally, at least a year after the disappearance. That single detail overturned nearly every assumption made in 2005. The girls hadn't died the night they vanished. They hadn't wandered into the wilderness and succumbed to exposure. At least one of them had survived. Long enough to be held. Long enough to be moved. Long enough for someone to decide what came next. As excavation continued, a second compartment was discovered behind a false wall. Inside were items that felt disturbingly personal. Scraps of clothing cut into strips, braided cordage made from fabric, and a weather-damaged notebook wrapped in plastic. Only fragments of writing remained legible. Short sentences. Corrections. Repetition. One line appeared again and again, written in different pressures, as if multiple hands had traced it. "That's not my name." Another page contained tally marks. Not days. Not weeks. Attempts. The deeper investigators went, the clearer the pattern became. This wasn't chaos. It was method. The layout suggested observation, control, isolation. One individual separated from the others. The drawings upstairs, 3 figures together, one apart, now made horrifying sense. Someone had been singled out. Someone had been chosen. As word spread quietly through internal channels, an analyst revisited the original witness tips from the mid-2000s, calls that had gone nowhere at the time. Among them was a statement from a roadside diner employee dated 2 years after the disappearance. She reported serving a teenage girl traveling with an older adult. The girl appeared withdrawn, hesitant to speak. When asked her name, she gave one, then flinched when the adult corrected her. According to the statement, the girl whispered something as they stood to leave. "I'm not supposed to say the old one." At the time, the report was dismissed as unreliable. Now, it was flagged as critical. More fragments surfaced. A ranger recalled encountering an unauthorized camp deeper in the Red Willow Range in late 2006. It had been empty when he arrived, fire cold, equipment packed away, but something about it felt staged. Too neat. Too deliberate. Photos from that encounter were recovered. In one image, pinned to a corkboard inside a temporary structure, were handwritten schedules. Wake times. Silence periods. Response drills. One note in the margin stood out. "If they forget, start again." Attention turned to personnel records connected to youth outdoor programs operating in the early 2000s, especially those that skirted licensing requirements. One name surfaced repeatedly across different regions, never long enough to establish a permanent presence. A field coordinator. An assistant guide. A contractor brought in during high-risk outings. Always temporary. Always unsupervised. Complaints followed wherever the individual worked. Excessive discipline. Unapproved isolation techniques. Missing documentation. Then, abruptly, the programs shut down. No charges. No formal investigations. Just silence. Search warrants were issued for properties tied to the individual's past. Cabins, storage units, abandoned leases. Most had been cleared out years earlier. One hadn't. Hidden beneath a collapsed shed floor miles from any marked road, investigators found a reinforced crawlspace. Inside were laminated cards strung together with wire. Flashcards. Each card displayed a question on one side. Who are you? What do you answer? What happens if you hesitate? On the reverse were scripted responses. Not names. Roles. The most devastating discovery came last. Buried within sealed juvenile court records was a guardianship filing from 2006. The child's original identity was redacted, replaced with a new one. The paperwork cited emergency circumstances and unrecoverable prior documentation. The guardian listed was temporary. The oversight minimal. The child would age out of the system a decade later, leaving no trace of who they had once been. The implication was unmistakable. One of the girls had been successfully erased. By the time law enforcement tracked the suspect's final known movements, it was already too late. A remote mountain range hundreds of miles away yielded another site, newer, deeper, reinforced against discovery. Inside were signs of recent use. Fresh bedding. Updated schedules, and a single flashcard left behind, face up. It read, "Practice makes permanent." To this day, no arrest has been made. The individual vanished before warrants could be served. The girl who survived, if she's still alive, has never come forward. And investigators are left with one unbearable question. If this happened once, how many times did it happen again? By the time the second site was secured, the investigation had crossed a line no one could walk back from. This was no longer about 3 girls who vanished in 2005. It was about a system. The newly discovered location sat high above a glacial basin, reachable only by an unmarked service trail that didn't appear on any public maps. The structure itself was newer than the one in Red Willow. Cleaner cuts, reinforced concrete, improved drainage. Whoever built it had learned from the past. Inside, the layout was familiar. 1 central chamber, 2 auxiliary rooms, and a final compartment, deliberately hidden, accessible only by removing a wall panel disguised as insulation. This chamber contained no restraints, no drains. Instead, it held a desk. On it were stacks of laminated instruction cards, arranged in careful order. Each stack was labeled by phase. Phase 1, silence. Phase 2, correction. Phase 3, reinforcement. There were no dates, no names, just process. Digital forensics pulled data from a weatherproof storage drive recovered beneath the desk. Most of the files were corrupted, but fragments remained, short audio clips, low-resolution videos, each time-stamped but stripped of metadata. In one recording, a young female voice hesitated before answering a question. "Who are you?" Silence. A second voice, calm, controlled, repeated the question. The girl answered again. This time, faster. "No. That's wrong." The clip ended. Investigators could never determine how many children had passed through these places. What they could determine was intent. This wasn't ransom. It wasn't violence for its own sake. It was identity destruction. The forensic psychologist assigned to the case described it in chilling terms: selective replacement. A process where multiple subjects are isolated together, their sense of self deliberately destabilized, until one is deemed compliant enough to be reshaped. The others, they were no longer needed. Attention returned to the original disappearance. Reanalysis of the campsite revealed details overlooked in 2005, not because they were invisible, but because no one knew how to read them yet. The tent zipper showed no damage. The girl's shoes were aligned by size. The fire had been reduced, not abandoned. Someone had been there with them. Someone who knew how to keep things calm. The final break came from an unexpected source. A woman in her early 30s contacted investigators after seeing a brief segment on a late-night news program. She didn't give her name at first. She didn't have proof. Only fragments. She said she remembered a different childhood. Not clearly. Not all at once. But she remembered being corrected when she spoke. Being told certain words were dangerous. Being punished for hesitating. She remembered forests. And drills. And being told the past was unsafe. Her DNA did not match any immediate records. But when cross-referenced against partial material recovered from the first underground chamber, the tooth, degraded skin cells trapped in fabric, the result came back inconclusive in a way that terrified everyone involved. The markers were too close to dismiss, but altered, as if time itself had been used to blur the truth. The woman eventually stopped cooperating. Her final message to investigators was brief. "I don't know who I was, but I know who I'm not allowed to be." She vanished shortly after. No forwarding address. No financial activity. No trace. Today, the official case status remains open, unresolved. The underground structures have been sealed. The land returned to conservation control. Access restricted. Files redacted. Evidence preserved. But questions remain unanswered. Why were 3 girls taken when only one was intended to survive? How many sites were never found? And how many children grew up believing a life that was never theirs? The Red Willow case is now taught quietly in investigative training programs, not as a solved crime, but as a warning. Because sometimes, the most dangerous criminals don't leave chaos behind. They leave order. And sometimes, the most terrifying disappearance is the one that looks like a successful escape. Do you believe one of the girls is still alive, or was the truth buried on purpose? Was this the work of one person, or something far bigger that was never exposed? Let me know your theory in the comments. And if you want more real-feeling, deep-dive true crime stories like this, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Your support is what keeps this channel alive.